The end times are upon us. The signs are happening. The end is near, but don't panic yet. You may have missed the rapture, but there's still time to prepare for what comes next. Disasters, plagues, celestial malfunctions, consider them friendly reminders. Now's the time to prepare. From homemade hazmat suits to heavenly currency and trustworthy prophets, this guide has you covered. Because when the heavens open and the world melts, belief alone won't save you. The Tribulation Survival Guide. How to stay alive when everything else is dead. Available now on Amazon.
You've wandered into Snarky Faith, the place where American Christianity gets skewered, roasted, and served cold. Faith on the fringe. Naming what's broken. Keeping what matters. Strap in. This is Snarky Faith.
Previously on Snarky Faith.
I'm going to eat some more of this if you're not careful. Oh. It's so good. Oh, my God. You didn't have lunch, right?
Wow.
I mean, it's so good. It's so good. We believe him, right? We believe him, right? Yeah. Welcome to Snarky Faith. I'm your host, Stuart Taloni. And before we start, I just want to say, this episode makes you uncomfortable. That's probably because you're misunderstanding it. We love you here. We just need you teachable. And if you feel hurt by anything we talk about today, maybe that's something you need to pray about. Because we're actually talking about gaslighting. Yep. If you've ever had that happen to you before, we're going to talk plenty about that. So what we're going to do is go ahead and hop right in to my conversation, my interview with author Becky Garrison. Here we go. As a religious satirist, Becky Garrison served as senior contributing editor of the Wittenberg Door from 1994 to 2008 and has been on its board of directors since its relaunch in 2021. She's the author of 11 books, including Jesus Died for This, and her latest is Gaslighting for God, a satirical guide to save yourself from spiritual narcissism. And I'm excited. You finally wrote a book that is going to teach, for those of us that have been around the church world, how to properly gaslight a congregation with like ultimate efficiency. Is that what this book is about?
That would be a book if a spiritual narcissist actually wrote it, but I'm writing the book as the counter antidote. This is how, and it's not just for church people. We're living in a culture, we keep forgetting that Americana Christianity, this began back in the 1950s when, we had the Billy Graham Crusades. Dwight Eisenhower said that the beginning of the National Prayer Breakfast, the God We Trust had already been on the coins after Civil War. It was now on the dollar. The Knights of Columbus got in God language inserted in the pledge. American Christianity, like Dwight Eisenhower, was this post-World War II Americana version of Levittown type Christianity. Mm-hmm. And this really, I would say, that's when we really started to find ourselves becoming what they would say is a Christian majority nation. So this book is, and then as people exited Christianity, we began to have, starting in the 60s, it probably went before that, the rise of a lot of secular gurus, really doing a lot of serious damage. So this book is designed to help spiritual seekers. The emphasis is on church because of how the American culture is situated, but it really applies to any spiritual seeker who's looking for ways to connect themselves to something better than themselves and greater than themselves. And we're in a period right now where a lot of people are looking to do that. And in periods, though, of global dysregulation, it's been very well proven, this is when the cults and the charlatans come in saying, I have the salve that will make you feel better. And when people are in so much pain like they're in now, they find the salve. They go for the guru. They go for what they want to fix. They need to see the world in black and white because it's so gray and scary.
Yeah.
And we're in a really tough time. And I sympathize with people that say, I just need to find a panacea. I just need to find something I can hold on to. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there in those positions doing the whole snake oil salesman dance.
Yeah, we've got one leading our country right now who's doing it better than most. He's learned from these other hucksters, but yeah, that's where we're at. But you are like, I feel like you're
Christian satire matriarch, if that's even fair. I mean, for a lot of this, like, you've been calling out stuff and making fun of this. A lot of this garbage that's within Christianity for a long time. And in the decades that you've been writing about American Christianity, at what point were you finally like, oh wait, this isn't hypocrisy or bad theology, this is like narcissism? Like, was there a light bulb or a...
It had to do with, as I was researching Jesus Died for This, in 2008, I started researching it. And this was like an accidental pilgrim, which, by the way, I did not know this, that 2008 also happened to be kind of the year that institutional Christianity really took a major hit. We really weren't thinking about it at the time, but this proved to be a time when a lot of the new kind of stuff just wasn't really new. It became, when I wrote that book, I still believe that Christianity could be redeemed. There were, on an institutional level, that the institutional church and the mainline church in particular just had bad gardening. They just need to clean up their gardening, clean it up a little bit, and as I was researching this, someone contacted me about my father, one of his former parishioners. And I began to examine this point because my late father was an Episcopal priest, sociology professor, and a raging alcoholic. He later drew my earth mother, who was the ultimate enabler, into that orbit, and they both died from their addictions. So I just assumed that they died from alcoholism. I had done a considerable amount of work on alcoholism, and I also realized most of my extended family fit the clinical definition of alcoholics. And I was an excellent alcoholism sponsor, but yet I was still being attracted to narcissistic energies. And this started with my dad's research when I picked up the work of comedian Meryl Marco, who was commenting on the David Letterman scenario, and she began to describe narcissists. And I said, that sounds like my family, because even when they sobered up, they would still act. Wait a minute, where's this revelation? I thought when someone stopped drinking, they would become a new person. They would, and sometimes they do. I'm not saying they don't, but when you get the same, not self-centeredness, but the inability to care that you exist, and this is important to note, is that narcissism is not egotistical, self-centered. And a lot of us, we're artists, we're writers, we talk about ourselves a fair amount. But if you tell me, hey, wait a minute, back off, I can say, oh, I'm so sorry, I wasn't aware, I was in my little artist bubble. I feel guilty, I feel appropriate shame when I don't acknowledge that someone else is in pain and I ignored it. In our humanity, sometimes we get stressed, we get in our little creative bubble. Right now I have a book out on the 26th. I am not the most receptive right now to hearing, other people's pain. My mind is like full of a lot of other stuff. But there is that sense I said of, oh my God, I'm so sorry. A narcissist does not have that. I started with my family. They had no empathy or compassion for how they're acting, and nor do they have any self-awareness for how their actions impact you. And furthermore, they tend to think that their shit doesn't stink. Whereas I know fully well that, mine does smell at times. And that started the journey with Jesus Died for This. And then the research into narcissism. When I moved to the Pacific Northwest, I got into a personal and professional relationship with a mindfulness therapist. And I later discovered he had malignant, really nasty narcissistic traits. And that got me into a support group for narcissistic people, of partners of narcissistic people. And then from there, I started thinking, there's a connection here. I need to research narcissism as well as alcoholism. And this was 2016. This is when The Body Keeps the Score started coming. The research into narcissism was coming. I've now found another book other books on trauma and spiritual abuse started coming out. And I began to make these connections, that there was something somatic going on. There was something that I needed to have a reaction to, in addition to all the work I'd done on curing myself from being attracted to alcoholic energies. I now needed to work on the narcissism piece.
Sometimes, this is a side note, but as you're describing narcissists and how they exist in life, from being a person that worries too much, has too much anxiety and all this, I'm like, gosh darn it, like, their life seems pretty good. In a certain sense, like, I'm hearing this, I'm like, wow, I would so love to not have all that baggage. Those assholes. No, but like, I mean, it's and this is I guess why it's so difficult, because when you talk about this in the book, that in religious situations, whether it's like Christianity or it's other type of alternative new age guru type stuff, that the real damage isn't belief issues. It's really the gaslighting. So let's talk about, what does gaslighting look like in practice in these systems?
Okay. Gaslighting is a system where they try to convince people that your reality does not exist. I mean, it comes from that movie where the movie is called Gaslight, and the husband was trying to convince the wife she's crazy, like by turning the lights out and telling her that it's not dark, you're imagining this. And they try to convince you that, whatever you're feeling, whatever you're experiencing, no, you didn't experience that. A classic example of my family would be, hey, my grandma's drunk. She's passed out. No, she's sleeping. And as it begins, that's a classic example. That pastor seems to be like he's acting a little bit inappropriate. Oh no, he's just expressing pastoral care and concern. Yep. So whenever you notice something is amiss, you are told you are wrong. And you are also then another thing called scapegoated, which is the person who is blamed for what's going on. Mm-hmm. So people tend to, you say something, Pastor so-and-so could never do that to you. I would never see that. That is dismissing your experiences. And then if anything happens to Pastor, it's your fault because you're the one who called him out.
Yeah, and but it's a system that continuously keeps itself insulated and moving, doesn't it? And so it's self-protective of a system. Yeah. Say more, sorry.
Well, we're also being, I think this is where I probably differ from some people. I mean, I feel that right now we're in a situation we're being gaslit as a nation. We're being asked to see reality. And here's where I differ from some of my peers. I think it's bipartisan gaslighting. Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody's really looking at you are in pain. I mean, what would make someone want to go, for example, to go into ICE? I don't believe that a person, they're enticed by the money. And next thing you know, they get put into this mentality where they're taught by people, you are better than other people. It's a whole system. Next thing you know, someone who might not have normally been inclined to commit violence is committing violence. That's probably an extreme example, but you can once you convince people that you are right, you have their best interests, and you can convince vulnerable people to follow you, they will do just about anything.
Yeah, you give them permission to be awful, is what we're saying.
Yeah, and I point that out in the chapter on sacred sexuality. If you could convince somebody to do something they normally think is disgusting, you've won them over. Mm. And so I think a true narcissist will say, to be part of the cause, to be part of this, you must do something. And if you don't want to do it, any reservation you have is not your moral conscience telling you. You're just being too sinful. You're being too disobedient to the cause. And you see this on the left and on the right. I fail to believe that I think most college students would never destroy their library. They would not do that. Students, that is when you go to a university, your library is sacred. I mean, it is. But yet, students were convinced to destroy their libraries in the name of social justice. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm using that as a small example. You see this in churches. People are convinced that we must, have a certain way of being, a certain way of looking, a certain way. You must follow this teacher, or there's something, you're not part of the in crowd. And people so much want to be in the in crowd that they ignore the normal size of, oh, this is something amiss, but I can't say anything because then I'm going to get kicked out of the cool kids club. Mm-hmm. And we're in a period of a lot of global, I continue to say we have global PTSD right now.
Yes, we do.
I mean, I did articles for Spirituality and Health all during COVID because I kept saying, yes, I know medically we're doing what's right medically. We can debate that, but even if we were doing what was right medically, we've ignored the spiritual and emotional and psychological well-being of people. And we needed to, and there was nobody who was trying to be creative for how do we keep that spiritual connection. What ended up happening, at least especially here in Portland, Oregon, is if you did not go along with certain, let's say, vaccine mandates, you were shunned to the point where you were considered an outcast. Mm-hmm. Now, once you shun someone and you tell them they're an outcast, you can't play with them, they are then, I would argue, in a susceptible position where they can be lured by someone and convinced to do things they might not normally do because you just immediately told them you're not good enough for us because you have a different belief. There was a lack of trying to help people come to any kind of a common ground on things. This has been going on for so long that we're now so polarized. And it's why I say in 2026, I'm stepping back from partisan politics. I'm seeing about reconnecting at the grassroots. Who wants to reconnect? And what do we have in common? Can we find, here in the Pacific Northwest, we have, brew pubs and tasting rooms that function like churches. Yep. So where do we go to find true connections that we can find apart from this narcissistic energy? Mm-hmm. But before you can get to that place where you want to find the communities, you first need to acknowledge and admit that this is not a healthy space. It might be a fun place to go and have a good time. You might enjoy some of the lectures, but this is not a really healthy place for you to spend, except, occasionally, sporadically.
No, it's very difficult. And so, yeah, I was curious because you referenced the Pacific Northwest. I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, but had lived out like 10 years ago. My wife and kids and I, we were out in north of Seattle, and it is a special place. It is a very different place in the world, and I love my time out there. There's a definite spirit to that area. I loved it out there. But when you're talking about this, so let's oftentimes in culture we throw around the term narcissist a ton. You can see it in people's reels and everything else. Everything's oh, I don't like you. He's a narcissist. All this. So give us kind of a working definition of a narcissist before we break it down.
Okay. A narcissist is someone who cannot experience empathy or compassion. The world. So that's what's different than egotistical. An egotistical person may think of themselves first and foremost, but when prodded, they will acknowledge the existence of other people, and they will acknowledge and feel at least some sense of shame and remorse when they hurt someone and when their actions impact other people. Also, the narcissist has a grandiose version of themselves. They cannot see other people's point of view, or they don't care to know about other people's point of view. It is my way, we're going to do it my way, or the highway. And they can be very charming. They're very charismatic. And if they're saying exactly what you want to hear, then you can be drawn into them. And in this respect, I say that it's helpful to treat a narcissist like I would treat going to see a comedy show. I don't have to agree with everything the comedian says. I might find it I'm same with a musician. I can enjoy the experience for what it is, but I don't expect it to be anything more. The problem is that a spiritual narcissist discusses how they can create a new community, a new world, a new way of being. And next thing you know, it's all about them. You're supporting them, their project, their vision. Your contributions are good to the extent they can help them create their vision. But the nanosecond you're not helpful, you're not used, you will get ghosted. You'll be discarded. And that, for many people, can be very devastating. I followed this leader for all this long time, and all of a sudden we had a disagreement, and now I'm on the outs. I'm put on the outs just because I disagreed with them. An egotist does not behave in that manner.
So do you think, and because you've done research into this, are people just born narcissists, or are they created as narcissists, or do we need to have an island where we send the narcissists off to go find out with themselves?
The research is still developing. What they seem to think is that people who are either, and this is where people who are, and I think that Donald Trump is this example, people who were the golden child of the family. Nothing that they did, they were never held accountable for anything. Everything they did was fine. Now, some people, we also don't know this. I mean, there's this very small section of kids that just grow up that have psychopathic tendencies, and we just don't know. There's a very small percentage of people who are just born with an inability to have any emotion. They're just totally devoid. They're saying the first few years of life, kids that are totally deprived of attention can grow up to becoming basically what they say, cold hard killers, people that just don't care. We're still looking at what becomes a narcissist. It is, to me, I think the bigger issue is not to discuss how they become, but how people can recognize and heal from them, because there's a much higher, because once someone rises into power, that's where the problem starts. Because if you could identify, if you had for example, with clergy, if they had a way to, is there a way to, when you give all those psychological screenings, they go through the clergy. What if you gave what if you administered the O'Hare psychopathy test? That might tell you, is this person a psychopath? Which is even more alarming than a narcissist. But I think if you begin to weed people out, now it's kind of hard to do this because anecdotal surveys place clergy as being the highest percentage of narcissists. I've heard anywhere from 25 to 40%, and it goes the higher you go up the chain. So the question is, who is going to administer this? And this is why I've given up on the institutional church. I think it is too narcissistic, riddled at the top to have transformational change. So I encourage people to look to see, where do you find it at the grassroots? You may find a community led by people that are filled with empathy and compassion. Do people say to you when you're gone, do they miss you? Or do they only want you if you want your volunteer services? Are you valued for you? If all of a sudden you gave them a bunch of money and then you lost money and you can't give them money, do they still want you around? Do they want you, or do they want your money and your talents? That's a key question to ask. And it can be really hard because we all want to belong to something.
We do.
And there are a lot of volunteer groups that do a lot of good work. There's also a lot of institutions that will definitely use the living daylights out of you to get what they want.
Yeah.
Once you could recognize the signs, like when I watch the signs of narcissism, it keeps me from going crazy, wanting to throw stuff at the screen. I just go, that person doesn't care about me. So I no longer care they are trying to do anything for my best good. I just try to say, who's going to do the legislation that's going to impact me the least?
Okay, so talk about let's hop into that. So you in the book you break down different types of narcissists that are pretty much pastors I've either served around or I've been around a lot of these. So I'll ask you. So you'll tell us what is specific about these different types of narcissists. So the first one you had in there was like an exhibitionist type narcissist. What does that look like?
This is the one that most people think of as being put on TV. You think of Steve Martin in Leap of Faith. You think any televangelist on TV. Mm-hmm. This is the one who's just is out there. Okay. There is no question. I would say, you can have it on the left. It's the Mark Driscoll, Nadia Bolz-Weber emphasizing muscular Christianity. Mm-hmm. It's the Rob Bell doing the kind, gentler thing. Ultimately, it's the person on top who is making the stage performance. Okay. They're the circus performer. And everyone behind them is designed to make the circus performer help. This is the guy who's going to bring in the money. In a mega church is called the teaching pastor. Now, the teaching pastor not necessarily, the lead pastor. Yeah. This is the person whose job is to put on the show. They put on a show and they bring in the bucks and people love to see them. Think of them as a carnival barker.
Okay. So we've got the carnival barker here. So the next one you have is a grandiose type.
A grandiose would be, that's also the royal narcissist. I was putting them in the category of people who basically they're better than you. Their titles are better than you. They're more supreme to you. They're more covert. I mean, the royal family would be a classic example of this. They are. It's not that common in the church. It's common in the more certain types of churches. You might find them, but it's not. They're not that. It's not that. A lot of the people do express things of grandiosity, of thinking that they're full of themselves. Mm-hmm. But not a lot of people exhibit the full, the royal we kind of...
Would you say that's a Franklin Graham? Kind of like...
I put Franklin Graham probably more in an exhibitionist category because he is pretty out there and obnoxious, as is a lot of the Graham family.
Freaking hate that. He's a dick. He's so insufferable. Sorry. The victim type narcissist. I'll try to not editorialize my feelings.
This is the one that I am the hardest to identify, because the victim narcissist is the one that will draw on your heartstrings. They're the ones who always they've been so persecuted. They've been so put down by the man. Yeah. Their story is genuine. And a lot of people have had these genuinely horrible experiences. However, over time, you notice that no matter how much you give, it's never enough. You notice that this person, the moment you say, I can't help, now you're being oppressive. Okay. Now you're being... And this is the type that just draws me in with the heartstring, because they have been abused. It's often the abuser instead of the abuser turning abusive, the abuser getting sympathy from their wounds. Gotcha. They have no interest in healing their wounds, because they heal their wounds. That's the end of their sympathy and the funding streams.
That's their capital. Oh, it's interesting. Okay, so yes, they need to not heal.
But yet they want to heal. They definitely want to heal, but they deprive. It's something they call narcissistic supply. A narcissist needs people to pay attention to them. Mm-hmm. If you do not pay attention to them, then there's nothing for them to do. And that's why you'll find when you do not cater to a narcissist's whims, they do something called narcissistic collapse, where they go completely ballistic because they are not getting their supply. And when they don't get their narcissistic supply, they go completely ballistic, and then they will probably likely explode. And then you just move on, and they're one and done.
One and done. Okay. Now these ones. Now these I like these other ones that you have here. I feel like they're less overt than we're necessarily seeing. Like, so you have seductive.
Okay, the seductive narcissist is also what I also was calling them, the comfy Christians. And they're the ones who just lure you in, the MLM marketing scheme kind of things. It's, this is so great. We've got a coffee shop in here. We can have some lovely, pretty... I mean, a lot of the... I'd say that the women's evangelical stuff really falls into this category for Christians. Everything looks so good and so beautiful. Just put your prayers away. It's very much into in-reach, absolutely no outreach. And it's encouraging everybody to be just as comfy. See, pay all this money for this course and how to live your best life now. Following The Secret, people that listen to Oprah, that kind of a... Joel Osteen probably falls into that category, even though he also has some of the exhibitionist side.
Yeah, I would say so, yeah.
And he's an example where these are not cut and dry categories. People can exhibit multiple categories. In fact, I would say that a lot of your exhibitionist narcissists, especially on the right, are also victim narcissists. Victim narcissists, and they're always being persecuted. Or everybody's out to get me.
Yeah.
So it's easy. I mean, I don't want to use these as like specific categories. They usually fall into one or more, but it's important to look at them from a different category perspective. And just look at them in terms of not just they're all this, they're all that. It can be a combination of things.
And I like, because in the book you talk a lot about being able to give people language, to be able to speak out about like those things. You're like, this doesn't feel quite right in this situation, but I don't have the words to put to it. And I feel like a lot of people have been in those situations where and I think that's probably one of the fertile grounds of gaslighting, is being in a situation like, what? No, it's fine. It's fine.
But it's also important to note that you could just be dealing with a difficult person. I mean, there are times when if I want to get something done, you can talk to some of my editors and they'll say that I can get so dogged about something and I can become an obnoxious asshole. And I need to be told, hey, Becky, back off. And I have good editors that do that. And some editors are like, it's just not worth it. And a good editor knows that the back and forth is going to produce really good stuff. But some people are like, I just don't want to deal with that. And it's important to make that distinction because sometimes, someone, you can be just with a prickly situation. You can be with someone who is, some of these people are prophets who want to do visions, are absolutely clueless for how to make it happen, and they can drive you crazy. But they're not narcissists. They're just, dreamers that need someone behind them to help them support things. So it's important to not automatically, to me, go for the narcissistic label, but rather look at the behaviors. Can this person connect with other people? Am I able to experience this person as a person? Because the moment we label somebody, I also think that there's the ethics of diagnosing, which is why I say narcissistic tendencies. I mean, I'm not going to say that so-and-so is a malignant narcissist, but they are showing those tendencies.
So, I mean, I don't know, if you were to say something like, give someone an example for a malignant narcissist, I don't know, what's a real world example, hypothetically?
Well, no, but I mean, that's one of the types of narcissism you described, and I'll just get to that briefly.
Yeah.
Malignant narcissist to me is basically thinking of any of the forms of narcissism I've outlined on steroids. And that's how you think of it. A malignant narcissist is where you get into the unethical, illegal, immoral activities. Once you identify someone is a malignant narcissist, your only option is to leave, and then to decide if the situation warrants legal action. I mean, this is when the person's activities, it goes beyond, just endorsing someone who doesn't care about you. It goes beyond, we're talking, there has been verbal abuse. There's been, you can actually label what you're experiencing as abuse. It's not a case. And, obviously, as most narcissists, you are going to experience some emotional, spiritual, and abuse. But the malignant takes it one step further. Now we're getting to unethical behavior. Now we're getting to sexual abuse. Now we're getting into the types of abuse that can induce trauma.
So you've and I love, because so much of the book it's your story moving through things, and it's hard at times, and I appreciate you had like a warning at the beginning, because it was like bringing me back to places too as I'm going through it. I'm going like, yeah, I remember. Yes, I'd forgotten about this kind of stuff in church, but when we looked at this in your journey, so like I'm assuming, right, Becky, like you were like, hey, leaving Christianity is the best thing that ever happened to me, and it fixed everything. And there was no narcissist that you experienced once you left it, and everything was sunshine and rainbows, right, Becky? Right? Is that how?
Actually, because it was more of a gradual thing. Because when we get into the types of narcissists, the other type that we mentioned in the book, the one that really drove me in was the communal Christian. Because I was always driven for finding new ways of being in community. Because I knew in my journey, as somebody who had to go low contact and finally no contact with my biological family, and learning I'm not the only one. And by the way, I do offer that in the book. Please work with a therapist on that. That was a very difficult decision. In my case, I had to do it for my own emotional sanity. But this is, too many people are saying, I'm going to cut you off because I don't like you. I'm cutting you off because you're mean. And I think if you work with a qualified trauma therapist, they can help you see, no, this is a difficult situation that you can work it out. You're just looking at life from two different perspectives. And you can work this out sometimes. But if you're dealing with, that's different than someone who cannot express empathy or compassion. Is this a difference in parenting styles where you both raise differently, so you have different approaches to money, you have different approaches to child rearing, you have different approaches to finances, to the kind of food. I mean, you just have a different lifestyles, and that can often be reconciled. Sometimes it can't be. I mean, if you have someone who believes that women should be a traditional stay-at-home mom, a woman who has a career that she wants to pursue, that's oil water. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that people are necessarily narcissists. It just means they have different lifestyles. But in my journey, I was learning to distinguish. I never really had that like split from Christianity. It was more like as I was searching for where are signs of goodness and community. And I still consider myself an apophatic, agnostic Anglican. I still believe in the Anglican principles of scripture, tradition, and reason. My institutional church, the Episcopal Church, does not practice that a lot of the times, but I still believe in that. I'm in a diocese in Oregon where there is not a church here that I would attend that I believe has the virtues that I look for in a community, which is community, sustainability, and spirituality. I don't see a church here because of how the bishops are leading things. But I still continue to look for where are there signs of spiritual connections. I find them in many of the brew pubs, the tasting rooms. I find them when I go to a music festival, some music festivals. I find there are ways to kind of connect at the grassroots. Once you get past the branded there's plenty of wineries I walk into and I'm like, no, this is like really she. This is snotty. I don't feel right. This is, oh God, I can just feel like the narcissist. This just feels like they want my money. They don't want me as a person. They don't care about me. The moment I don't have cash to pay, they're going to abandon me. And I could have a good time if I'm loaded and I have the money and I want to spend and have a nice event. But this is not a community. This is a fun event that I'm paying money to enjoy and experience. Just like when I go to a nice restaurant, I don't expect, I'm going to have this community. I'm like, I want a nice meal. If the restaurant, the bar, and the brew pub have community type bonding experiences, that's great. I'll keep coming back to that place for that. And in fact, I'll probably go to that place more than some places just offers just good food. But I think that's what I was going. So I would say that I never really, I didn't have that deconstruction of my faith because the Anglican faith was such that I can still carry the values with me to this day. And I'm Anglican because my late father was an Episcopal priest, so I jokingly say I'm prenatal Episcopalian because I was Episcopalian by apostolic succession before I was born. And I say agnostic because to me the best way of going is I just don't know. There is something, I live in the Pacific Northwest, I can tell you there is something when I go into the woods that is beyond myself. When I sit by the rivers, when I sit by the beaches, when I communicate with nature, when I walk into a vineyard that is containing the grapes from a wine that I'm going to be drinking. There's something, a winery here in McMinnville, Massara Winery. Massara is Persian for the marriage of sun and earth. There is something sacred about bringing us together in communion, especially with wine, but also beer, spirits. We've been bringing ourselves together for quite some time. It's just where we find community right now, I don't think is in the institutional church. It might be in some individual churches. But there's a lot of stuff happening. But look at where are the young people going for church or to have spiritual experiences. They're not going to churches, And
a lot, because you're mentioning even like that's one of the problems that we're at. Like post-COVID, everyone is online. And like it's kind of broken down things for us, and we don't get out. We don't touch a tree. We don't like touch grass. We don't and we don't connect in those certain ways. And we become so polarized, especially online, and we just yell at each other and we yell past each other, and it doesn't get us anywhere. But it's so it seems like part of your journey has helped you to find like where there is ripe fruit and where you're wanted, and those spaces that are like nope, that's not for me. Is that what I'm hearing?
I say that's a journey that I'm on that I encourage other people to be on, because I've seen people, and I've done it in the past, pre-COVID. I mean, there was some spiritual, there's a spiritual community and focusing on, sacred sexuality or cannabis or a whole lot of other different topics of that. And during COVID, there was a huge split here in Portland. And if you didn't want to protest, I would say if you questioned any of the COVID mandates, even if you said, and yet they would let us come out and get together for very large scale gatherings if you were protesting. So you end up having this culture where people, if you didn't want to protest, you're not part of my community. And setting aside the fact that I say as a journalist, I don't protest. I do the fourth wall. I respect the fourth wall. I will report. But I also began to notice that our protests in Portland were not about helping people of color. They were about white women virtue signaling. So I hate to say it, but that is what it became. And I'm seeing a lot of protests, and I'm hearing from people of color. I'm hearing from LGBT people. This is not helping us. So I think there has been this kind of, how do you do, that kind of work? But it also secured people. People said, if you don't subscribe to this, if you use the wrong pronouns, if you use the wrong, or if you ask people to use your pronouns, so that became a dividing point. Pronouns, no pronouns. Okay, that's one dividing. And then there's all these markers that divided us. And it became to the point where you just couldn't, you're walking on eggshells. You can't become a real community if you're always on eggshells, afraid you're going to say and do the wrong thing. And I don't think that everybody that became, that acted like this were in fact narcissists. There is this sign, I noticed this that when I was more and more trauma bonded, when I was in that position where I was getting triggered, I couldn't see anybody else but my own triggers. I was in a state of being triggered. And so this is why I question how many people who are being triggered, once you get treatment for your triggers, I don't do that anymore. I now can see, like I can stop myself. Like if someone all of a sudden is like telling me, I've had a debate this past week where a beloved evangelical author who passed away is releasing a new book, and someone posted, I love this person. And I just kind of wrote back and said, are you aware of what this person's done? And they said, no. In the past, I would have debated them. I would have argued them to the point where they would have blocked me because I was being an ass. I wasn't respecting the fact that this person loved this person, even though I think she has an abusive history. That person has a right to love who they love. And she was also, people can be so attached to the work that saved them, they can't see when that person turned abusive. And we see this with Philip Yancey, and we see it with and that's the most recent example, but you see it, people say, even with Mark Driscoll, people are going, I love Mark Driscoll's work. He really, but
I know people do. Somebody has said this before,
because what they did is, like Mark Driscoll, Nadia Bolz-Weber, Rachel Holt Evans, Jim Wallace, Shane Claiborne, Brian McLaren, the Emergent Church Village people, the outlaw preachers, they were reaching people who were dissatisfied with the way evangelicalism is. And they would love the fact that somebody gave them an alternative way from the increasing politicalization of the evangelicalism and the corresponding milquetoastness of the mainline church. There was this dynamic thing happening. And when you try to point out, hey, look, there's a lot of abuses going on with these people are just taking evangelicalism and remodeling it into their own self-service. They're just as narcissistic as these evangelical megachurch dudes that they're protesting against. And there's a fair amount of church too abuses, including even including some instances you were hearing of sexual assault. And people saying, I need evidence. And you kind of go, okay, I can't give you evidence. I can tell you what people are telling me. They're too afraid to come forward because the blowback from a narcissist is such that they will lose their community. They will lose their friends. All of you who love and worship this person will kick them out of whatever clubs or groups they're allowed to participate in because they disagree, so they stay silent. That does not mean abuse didn't happen. And that's become probably one of the most hardest things in reporting on this, because I can tell you right now that in my over 30 years of reporting, I can count on one hand the number of false cases that I've heard. Every great once in a while, someone is going to accuse someone because they have Munchausen syndrome, or they have a psychological disorder where they intentionally cause themselves to suffer, or they cause their child to suffer so they can get attention. But this is rare. That for someone to be so hurt that they would be willing to break up their community by accusing the leader of an abuse, that is rare. It is much more common that the abuser knows how to target vulnerable people. And if you weren't targeted, I will say to people, were you raised in a healthy environment? Were you raised in an environment where you got all of your needs met emotionally as a child? If you were raised like somebody like me, I am very vulnerable to being the Uber volunteer that will do anything to help you. It took me a long time to cure myself of that. It wasn't until I did EMDR that I began to realize how I was being used. Because the moment my Uber volunteer services weren't needed, like I needed to go out of town or I needed to just take a break, it was like I never existed. Yeah. And it took me a while to realize that. And now that I realize that, I've broken my addiction to being that Uber volunteer, and I can see a lot more clearly. But I don't know if that's a long roundabout way to answer your question, but I never really left the spiritual space. It just left me, and I began to lose those toxic spaces where that did not welcome all. I now look for spaces that welcome everybody. They put people over politics. They put, they don't say, "Are you Episcopalian?" They say, "Hey, you want to come in and grab something."
Yeah. No, I feel like it's just moving us back to being just humans. I mean, being able just to see people's co-humanity in certain situations. But I feel like a lot of that's been lost nowadays, which is very, very sad. And these spaces, but you're right. It is so sad because I'm a person that comes from a trauma background as well too, and how easily and attractive it can be to be in these spaces, because it's kind of like, trauma and abuse to those that have been abused tells you something's wrong with you. And then what is like one of the core tenets of Christianity? You're born as a piece of shit, and God won't love you unless you do a thing. Kind of,
But then the mainline church, it's a little bit different, because the Anglican theology starts with Genesis 1. We're all born good in the image of God. And a lot of mainline churches preach more the Gospels versus the Pauline letters. Yeah. But still, my big thing with the institutional church is it just never did anything. Its response to this was, bad Trump. Yeah. I'm like, well, are you providing me with an alternative view that's not corporatized?
Yeah.
Are you really actually doing something for me? I was watching a Fox News show last night, and I don't know why I did that. But what was very telling is they were accurate. They were pointing out how many drone attacks Obama did, how many ICE raids Obama did. And I'm sitting here going, yeah. And you start to look at what, it's kind of like the Democratic Party. I mean, this is what Hillary was saying in 2016. I'm not as bad as Trump. So when you have people telling you, and this is what basically I think the liberal wing does, we don't suck like that. Yeah. Come see something that sucks less. And I'm like, well,
I suck differently.
And I'm like, but yet if you don't want to buy into their BS, you still find yourself kicked out and on the ostracized list. It still is that it's the elevation of the Christian celebrity complex. And I recall this, like back in 2000, I put this in the book, is that back in 2011, starting in 2007, I was asked to write 3 books by the church publishing on these new forms of church. I was so excited. These are people on the grassroots, largely a lot in the UK, because the church there disintegrated to the point where they're like, just do whatever the hell you want to do. You can just have, so they started developing what later became known as fresh expressions of church, where churches were doing these individual ways of connecting and doing services that reached the local community. It was done under the auspices of the Church of England, but they really weren't like micromanaging this. Do what you feel will help to bring people in. So some very innovative stuff happened. And this was starting to come over in the United States. I started covering some churches here in the U.S. that were doing this. But the Episcopal Church, and so instead of like helping to promote this kind of horizontal stuff, they informed me, people aren't asking for that. They're asking for the works by Phyllis Tickle, Brian McLaren, Nadia Bolz-Weber, Rachel Held Evans, blah, blah, blah. And that's what they started promoting. So all of a sudden the Episcopal Church, instead of, looking at this horizontal form of, which is not going to produce the same amount of money, because horizontal type leadership, you don't have this one big person where you can charge a lot of money and have this huge laden weekend with, celebrity speaker coming in to do all their talking and whatnot. But you end up at the end of the weekend having a more connective experience where you're learning how to connect. You're learning how to hear people's stories. You're learning how to, quote unquote, really do church. And it's not glamorous. It's not exciting. And it doesn't produce the bucks and the bang. And it doesn't get the PR buzz. You're just doing the work of the church. And somehow the Episcopal Church, the moment they preferred that, that's when I said the institutional church is dead.
It's a business. It's a business.
It really is a business. And I think right now, they're now like basically the Titanic, as far as the institutional churches are going on the main line, the Titanic is sinking. What's keeping the church alive are endowments. And endowments are,
But come on, Becky. Come on, Becky. I've been reading stuff. Isn't there a revival now? Isn't the church growing now? Come on. I know.
There's what you're looking at is churning. You have to look at evangelical churning.
Yeah.
The issue is that the number of women and this is from the trad wife perspective, the number of men, young adults under 40 who are looking at church is about 26. And that was the same number it was about 10 years ago. The number of women who have left the church was about the same as men 10 years ago. It's now gone up to 40. So you have all these men who want traditional wives who are staying in the church, and all these women are going, screw this. I'm not. So I think you're seeing the church is not looking, but the young people have left the building.
Yeah.
This was done about 15, 20 years ago. There's a survey came out that said about half of Americans are raised with no religion. But yet, when someone dies, like here in Oregon, on a bicycle, they will set up a bike ghost memorial. People do memorials. They do rituals. I have been to cacao ceremonies, sound bath ceremonies, ecstatic dances. Some of them, they're just goofy as hell. And you kind of go, okay, this is like, this is basically like, I'm looking for when is Gwyneth Paltrow and the Goop committee going to come in? So I'm not saying that this is, all, and I've been to some, but I've been to others where it was like receiving communion.
Yeah.
We actually were connecting at a different level through a shared experience. And for that moment, we were all connected for a brief moment. And if we can get connected for that brief moment, what about now? What can we do? We're all connected for that brief moment. What can we all come into an agreement with? And this, to me, is the beginning of trying to start to heal from narcissistic abuse. But to do that, you need to have leaders who can express empathy and compassion, who can step back. Yeah. They're the DJ. They're the curator. They're not the head of the show. They're the person letting the spiritual experiences happen and not trying to control it and seeing where the spirit really goes. And I'm seeing some of that has been very frustrating. A lot of people I know want that, but where we find it has been kind of that disconnect of how do we find it in this world that's filled with so much noise? Yeah. How do you find the still quietness?
It's not online usually. I'll tell you that. Yeah. It's around other people and it's away from all the noise that we're dealing with online. Oh my gosh. This has been a fantastic conversation. Becky, when is the book coming out?
January 2026.
And the book is Gaslighting for God by Becky Garrison. She talks in such honest and I feel like it's earned terms, because I feel your journey in this, and you're naming the machinery behind spiritual abuse and explaining why good people get trapped in it, and you're giving us language about how to walk away and keep your sanity and go to better places. So Becky, thank you so much, and check out the book. And we're everywhere? Where can you find the book, Becky? Anywhere?
It's available all online retailers. Lake Drive Books on the website has a link to all the places where you can buy the book.
And Becky, if people want to find you online, how do they stalk you, find you?
Well, there's BeckyGarrison.com. I'm at Facebook, Becky Garrison Writer. At Instagram, Becky_Garrison. And then there's if you Google Gaslighting for God Substack, it will come up, and that's where I'm posting a lot of my fun stuff. So, and also, I'm also on Medium under Becky Garrison. So you just pick whatever platforms pike your fancy.
Awesome. Thank you, Becky.
This Choircast podcast is brought to you by The Collective. At The Collective, we believe that justice isn't optional, it's actually sacred. That's why we're building a growing library of progressive resources, connecting you with queer and Black-owned businesses, linking to books that challenge the status quo, and delivering content that empowers you to resist fascism with clarity and compassion. So join the movement. Support the mission. Visit The Collective, that's QUOLLECTIVE.com, The Collective, to learn more and get involved.
The end times are upon us. The signs are happening. The end is near, but don't panic. You may have missed the rapture, but there's still time to prepare for what comes next. Disasters, plagues, celestial malfunctions. Consider them friendly reminders. Now's the time to prepare. From homemade hazmat suits to heavenly currency and trustworthy prophets, this guide has you covered. Because when the heavens open and the world melts, belief alone won't save you. The Tribulation Survival Guide. How to stay alive when everything else is dead. Available now.